What do we say when we hear someone has taken their own life? We call them sick. We guess that they probably have a disorder of some sorts. So keeping that in mind, I want you to check out this clip of a psychiatrist that went viral with over 16 million views. Check this out.
On suicide, it's very interesting. So the number one thing that correlates with male suicide is not depression, and this is super scary. There's one study I saw recently that suggests that 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. And this, I believe this statistic in my clinical practice because I know what depression looks like. I know what bipolar disorder looks like. And half the men that I've worked with, at least, are not actually mentally ill. See, mental illness means a pathology of the mind, which means that the mind is malfunctioning. Most of the suicidal men that I work with, their mind isn't malfunctioning. They genuinely have a life that is no longer worth living. They're looking at things and objectively realizing that there's no way out of this situation. So they turn to suicide. So I know it's kind of like a very controversial statement, but I think that's what my clinical practice has shown, and there's some research to even back that up.
So there's a lot to unpack there. We're going to go back. We're going to slowly pick it apart one by one and talk about why this was so impactful, why it was viewed by over 10 million people, and why some people were pretty unhappy about that. So the first thing to note about the 13-second mark, this psychiatrist says, based on his clinical practice, there are a ton of people who lean towards taking their own lives, who have thoughts of taking their own lives, who are not mentally ill, who do not have a disorder. They are not, as we call, oh, the poor person, he was sick. They are not. And these people do not have a history of mental health diagnoses, and then they commit these acts against themselves. So the question becomes, how is that possible? If someone isn't sick, if someone doesn't have a disorder, why would they do that? Or how do you know that they don't have a disorder? Dr. K, the psychiatrist here, says, I know what depression looks like. And what he's referring to is when you see a psychologist, when you see a counselor, they go by what we call the DSM manual. It's a manual of all the different diagnostic disorders that an individual could acquire, that could be given to by a trained professional. And the way these disorders work is you have to meet the minimum criteria to be diagnosed. So let's say, for example, if we're talking about major depressive disorder, you need 4 out of the 9 symptoms for a minimum of 2 weeks. Then we can group you in as having major depressive disorder. Folks, what happens if you have 4 out of the 9 symptoms, but you only have them for a week and a half, then they go away, and then they come back again? And then you have it again for a week and a half, and then they go away, and then they come back again. Or what happens if instead of having 4 of the 9 symptoms, you only have 3 out of the 9 symptoms, but you've had them for the last 6 months? So we recognize very quickly that the way that we classify and diagnose people, what happens if you're experiencing mental health troubles, but it's not quote unquote severe enough to be diagnosed as a disorder, but it's not nothing. It's harming your life, or it's impacting your relationship, it's impacting your career, and it's impacting your everyday life. And this doctor's answer, and I've heard this before from other psychologists, is when you think about a disorder, it's a malfunction of the brain. Something is going, or something's happening that shouldn't be happening. Where with these people, that's not the case. It's not a malfunction of the brain. They have a life that is not worth living. Let me clear this up for you. Sometimes you have people who are in a happy marriage, who enjoy their job, they have good relationships, they exercise, and they experience depressive symptoms despite all of that. Right? And this person would go to a psychologist or psychiatrist, and as he's telling them about, I'm satisfied with my marriage, I like my job, I have friendships, I don't know why I feel depressed. That's in line with the diagnostic criteria when we talk about a malfunctioning of the brain. Here's what isn't. If you talk to someone and they don't like their job, they're not happy in their relationship, something's just gone terribly for them financially or whatever personally, and they say, my life sucks, Most people, or most psychiatrists, psychologists in their head are thinking, it does. It logically makes sense for you to feel this way. A very easy distinction I heard between someone who's burned out and someone who has a depressive disorder is you take someone who's burned out from work, you put him in a resort, in a villa in Mexico, and his mood will increase. You take somebody with a depressive disorder who loves his job and life is going all right for him, you take him out, you put him in a resort in Mexico, his mood will not increase. And that's a really, really, really important distinction, where there's people who are taking their own lives, they don't have a mental disorder, but they don't enjoy their life. There is so much suffering in life that whatever they have going on the other end of it, is not valuable enough to them to keep on doing this. A psychologist who was a professor of mine said, one of the first things I ask people when they come talk to me is I ask them, or I try to figure out, are you really depressed? Or is your life just miserable? And those are not the same thing. Because if your life is just miserable, it tells me if we can change your circumstance, if you can get a job, and that means you'll be making more money, that means you can go on vacation, that means you're not worried about paying rent, it'll increase your mood. But if you're really depressed, it doesn't matter if we change your job, it doesn't matter if you get 6 girlfriends instead of 1, it doesn't matter if you have all the best friends in the world, nothing will influence your mood. And when you have someone who believes their life is not worth living, they objectively view their life and they say, I've got nothing going on for me. I'm 30 years old. I'm still living at home. I don't have an education. I'm not physically where I'd like to be. I don't have many social connections or friends. I shame myself because I eat too much or I watch pornography, whatever it may be. I'm looking at my life objectively. It sucks. I've been enduring this for years. I want out. So this is really important, folks, when we talk about mental illness. We have to distinguish between a mental disorder versus symptoms of something. Okay? You can have stomach ache or you can feel nauseous. That does not mean you have the flu. Feeling nauseous is a symptom of the flu. It's possible, but just because you exhibit one symptom does not mean that we can diagnose you for the disorder. So what happens? A lot of people are in a bad place and they think to themselves, well, it's not severe, right? Like I'm not bipolar. Like they compare themselves to like the worst thing possible mental health wise. They go, well, I'm not that, so I'm not going to get help. You know, and in a degree, they're right. Because if they were to go and they don't meet that criteria, what is it like when you're not happy with your life and a psychologist says, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You're good to go. I don't know why you're unhappy. We went through the DSM. You don't meet the criteria for major depressive disorder, mood dysregulation disorder, bipolar disorder, or persistent mood disorder or something along those lines. So the question becomes, Daniel, what is a life that is not worth living? It's individualized. But generally, you can talk about a life that is not fulfilling. A life where you don't enjoy what you do. I was listening to a podcast with Dana White, president of the UFC, and he said this sentence, and he said, I don't want to go to sleep at night because I love my life so much. I do not want to go to sleep at night, or I can't wait to wake up tomorrow because I love my life. If you have a life that's not worth living, it's the opposite. You don't want anything to do with your life. You've got nothing holding you on. Right? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I paying these taxes? Why am I going to work 40 hours a week? For what? So this is really alarming because it means that an individual with no history of mental illness, someone who has not been diagnosed, can take their own life. And it's hard to see it coming, at least from the people on the outside. Now, this is not a defeatist view, right? This is not saying, well, look, you're not depressed. Your life just sucks. You want a way out? Fine, take it. That's not what this is at all. But it's recognizing, I made a video about this just a few weeks ago. It's, look, we can change your beliefs all we want. But if you're going through a rough patch with your girlfriend or your boss, after you leave the counseling session, your boss is still going to be there on Monday, right? You still have to see your girlfriend tonight over dinner. So it's actually very logical where you have these people that are in terrible circumstances. It was my understanding based off of my research that one of the most common things associated with suicide was depressive symptoms. And that if we could lower somebody's depressive symptoms, the hope is that we could lower the chances that somebody would take their own life. Now, mind you, this is one perspective. This is one way to look at it, and the jury is still out. Like, we're still doing research trying to figure out other ways to help people. We know that SSRIs work with some people, but not all. And we know that there's a lot of people that are not going to counselors, that can't even get on the damn wait list, that can't afford to see anyone, that symptoms aren't diagnosable, and yet they're harming themselves. When you're thinking about depressive symptoms, or when you're thinking about someone who's not in a good place, it's often associated with thoughts of what we call the negative triad. Thoughts about yourself, your future, and the world. So if I think I'm a loser, and I think I'll always be a loser, permanence, and I think the world is an evil place that beats up guys like me, with those beliefs, how am I going to carry myself throughout life? What is that going to do to me mentally? And if I'm not diagnosed with major depressive disorder, but I have a life that I do not enjoy, that is not fulfilling, that is weighing me down, what do we do about that? And that's actually one of the first things that we want to talk about, is when you have a life that you do not like, that you do not find fulfilling. The good thing about this is if you can change your circumstance, you can change your mood. If you do not have a malfunction of the brain, it means that if we can change your job, if we can change your relationship, if we can change your relation with your body and physical and nutrition, we can put you in a better place. So it's actually the contrary. It's not that, well, if you don't have a life worth living, whatever, you should just GG and be on your way. No. What don't you like about your life? Exactly. What would life look like for you to say, I'm excited to get out of bed? I look forward to Monday. What would that look like? And we can't do it all at once. I don't think that's possible. But if we can focus on one area of our life, and just one little domino at a time, maybe we can propel ourselves forward to a better future. Thank you for listening, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.